Hello, citizens of the internet. My name is Jack Foglesong, and welcome to my video analysis of The Soul of Anime, Collaborative Creativity and Japan's Media Success Story by Ian Condry. Before getting into much more about this book itself, I'll have to come clean. This is for a university project of mine where I needed to read an ethnography, or an anthropological study, set in a country of my choosing. Seeing as how I find the entertainment consumed and created by different cultures very interesting, I decided to read this book. As the title subtly suggests, this book is about anime, and it was because of this that I decided to include the video you just saw. My reason for using that video was because it was made by a former YouTube content creator in order to satirize some certain aspects of your stereotypical anime opening, which are often a very important part of the experience of watching these different shows. In fact, the song, funny enough, in this video is from one of the openings for the very long-running show Naruto, which boasted 20 openings over the course of 700 episodes. Throughout this work, Condry writes about the industry behind Japanese animation and what has led to anime being such a popular art form around the world. But before getting much more into what he has to say about the industry, I'll briefly go over who Ian Condry is and what he was studying during his fieldwork at many leading animation studios in Tokyo. Ian Condry is a professor of Japanese culture and media studies at MIT. He received his bachelor's degree from Harvard and his PhD in anthropology, or the study of humans, from Yale in 1987 and 1999, respectively. Not long after receiving his PhD, Condry began teaching at MIT, starting in 2002, where he has remained ever since. This book was his second published work, following Hip Hop Japan, which primarily focused on the music industry in Japan and the American influences that can be seen in the popularity of hip-hop. Interestingly, this is something that is also referenced in The Soul of Anime. Nice self-promotion there, Dr. Condry. Now, seeing as how the book is divided into 7 chapters, with each one detailing a certain area of the industry, I figured that this would be a logical way to organize this video. So I will primarily focus on some of the bigger ideas and themes Condry addresses, while using those 7 chapters to organize my points. During his introduction, Ian Condry presents the main idea behind his book: the collaborative creativity shared between the creators of anime and the communities that consume their creations. However, before going any further into this subject, he says, nearly a quarter of the way into the video, I will quickly establish what anime means and compare that with how it is explored in the book. While the term anime does imply a certain stylistic presentation, large eyes, spiky hair, stuff like that, the word itself stems from a more fluid set of ideas and concepts concerning animated media. In its most blanket form, for description, the term anime is used to refer to any piece of animation that originates from Japan, regardless of the style of that animation. Something that complicates this is the fact that the word anime is used in Japan to refer to animation in general. So, technically, something like the 2007 film B-Movie could be called an anime if one were using this understanding of the term.
According to all known laws of aviation, there's no way a bee should be able to fly. Its wings are too small to get its fat little body off the ground. The bee, of course, flies anyway, because bees don't care what humans think is possible.
Discussions and jokes about what makes an anime notwithstanding, for the sake of brevity, I will stick to the interpretation of anime as being a style of animation that often originates within Japan itself. To start things off, chapters 1, 2, and 3 are titled Collaborative Networks, Characters and Worlds as Creative Platforms, and Early Directions in Post-War Anime. The collaborative networks discussed in Chapter 1 consist of various teams behind famous animation studios in Japan, and this chapter shows the work environments of these studios. Something interesting about these production teams is the rather distinct fact that they're usually mostly made up by men, leading to amusing situations such as one where a production team watched a documentary about a high school volleyball team in order to maybe try and catch a glimpse of a real girls' room. Chapter 2, on the other hand, explores the settings and the characters of these films and series, analyzing how they draw viewers in. The final chapter within this trio mainly consists of a tracing of the history of Japanese animation, and it shows the process of creating anime. Throughout this explanation of anime industry practices, Condry contrasts Japanese animation with its American counterpart in a studio such as Pixar or something like that. The main difference he outlines is the order of voice recording and animation. According to Condry, dialogue in American animation is recorded first, while dialogue in anime is instead recorded after the animation is already completed. This kind of leads to a difference between the two styles, where American animation works to shape the animation to fit the voice actor, while Japanese animation, the voice actors instead change themselves to try and fit the animation. Chapters 4 and 5 mainly concern the commercial aspects of anime, along with providing more information on the production process. Because Chapter 5 is similar to Chapter 3, though, I'll elaborate on that first and then move on, so to speak, to Chapter 4, if you'll stay with me while we bend time a little. Chapter 5, entitled Making a Cutting-Edge Anime Studio, stands out compared to Chapter 3 because of the cultural assumptions that inform these anime studios. Because of these assumptions, the eccentricities of other cultures and peoples can present interesting questions to anime creators. One example of this can be seen when a producer asks Ian Condry why Americans seem to not use umbrellas, something the Japanese gentleman saw while visiting New York City. Though that may seem somewhat inconsequential of a question, it serves to show how something as simple as umbrella usage can vary between cultures. There really is no set situation for all that. Moving on, or backward I suppose in this case, Chapter 4 explains the prevalence of large robots in anime and how their popularity tied into the commercial aspects of the business. What made the usage of commercialism so easy in this instance was the ability of toy manufacturers to create various toys and models based on the piloted robots from the television shows and movies enjoyed by legions of fans. This then fed into the need for fans to be more involved in the shows themselves, at least from the perspective of the fans. And another aspect of this is the idea of research, in quotes, which was this practice that many fans of a show called Gundam, about piloted robots, would engage in, where they would theorize about different science fiction elements of the show, why something works while something doesn't. And this practice of making fan theories and engaging with the show on another level is something commonly associated with fans of just about any other form of media, not just anime. The desire to theorize about deeper meanings of your favorite show or movie or book can often greatly heighten your enjoyment of that. Moving on to Chapter 6, this chapter is ominously called Dark Energy, and it is called so in reference to fan participation in a not necessarily legal way. This participation comes in the form of fan subbing, where people gain unauthorized access to recent broadcasts of anime and add their own subtitles for non-Japanese speaking audiences. Condry, in this chapter, he compares fan subbers to graffiti artists who take this great amount of pride in the craft of their work more than anything else, because they do this all for free. It's like a sport almost to them. The dedication of these people into something rather inconsequential to their everyday life, I would imagine, contributes to what Condry would call the soul of these communities, which in this case is unfortunately built up by questionably legal practices. The final chapter deals with what may be one of the most interesting parts of these fan cultures: the parasocial relationships that can form between fans and fictional characters. Now, before going on, I will briefly explain, for those of you who haven't heard this phrase before, what exactly a parasocial relationship even is. Essentially, a parasocial relationship is a one-sided relationship between two people in which one person becomes infatuated with the other. And the defining characteristic of this is that the object of the infatuation does not reciprocate any feelings whatsoever. That's what makes it parasocial. While this is often associated with celebrities and other such real people, a parasocial relationship can develop between any parties as long as the connection between them exists. One particularly striking example of this within the anime community can be seen in a man by the name of Taichi Takashita, who apparently started an online petition in 2008 in order to call for recognition of marriage to an anime character. And while this was picked up by a lot of national news in a way to say, look at those wacky Japanese doing their thing, I find this very interesting because it suggests that much of what we understand to be like a relationship is still evolving. And I would personally keep an eye on this phenomenon because I wonder if it may not become more popular with the years. But I suppose we'll have to see on that one. In the interest of adding something directly from the book, I'll now read a passage in which Ian Condry interviews a director by the name of Shinichiro Watanabe, talking about a recent TV show of his that recently premiered called Samurai Champloo. One interesting fact about the word champloo is that it comes from the word chanpuru, which can mean to mix, meaning the title could be interpreted as Samurai Remix, but that'll make a lot more sense after we read through the following. Without much further ado, let's read the passage entitled, What Makes a Hip-Hop Samurai World? Consider the premise of the TV series Samurai Champloo, 2004, which rethinks samurai by using hip-hop music. Rather than using hip-hop primarily as a background element, the director, Shinichiro Watanabe, chose to use it as a way to think about cultural production. In March 2005, just before a party to celebrate the airing of the final episode of Samurai Champloo on Japanese TV, I had a chance to sit down with Watanabe in a coffee shop near the historic, now shuttered, Japkoma Theater. Asked how hip-hop inspired him, he said, first of all, sampling. In pop music these days, there's a lot of sampling of phrases from old jazz and soul records, placing the needle in just the right spot, using cut and paste, and mixing them with a beat of today. In that way, they create a new kind of music. I wanted to make a period piece using samurai, which is a style that's been around in Japan a long time with a lot of classics. I wanted to use these classics not to copy them, but to sample them. The creativity of hip-hop DJs involves using samples, adding a beat, and moving the crowd. In a way analogous to thinking about anime creativity in terms of characters and worlds, hip-hop creativity, at least in the DJ music producer realm, involves sampling and remixing. This cut and mix style is used to introduce the characters and the premise of the show in the opening episode of Samurai Champloo. To the scritch-scratch sound of the DJ's turntable, the series moves back and forth between the three main characters, namely two masterless samurai and a tea-shop girl. Intriguingly, sampling as a creative practice is expanding across other media forms as well, arguably driven in part by digital technologies, but also clearly part of a widening recognition of the creativity of remixing, as we saw with fan-made anime music videos, something Ian Condry addressed earlier in the introduction. Watanabe's work reminds us that defining the premise of a series can include connections beyond the Japanese Edo-era world itself, the time period Samurai Champloo takes place in. Although the overall story is vaguely defined as a search for the samurai who smells of sunflowers, and the themes draw from the stock characters of samurai period pieces, evil toll guards, lords of the penchant for guns, malls, and the pleasure quarters, the premise is also connected to things outside the world of the series. According to Watanabe, hip-hop provided a key concept beyond sampling that underlies the premise for Samurai Champloo. There's also the idea of represent, writing it in katakana, the Japanese syllabary for foreign words. Many Japanese people nowadays aim to be inconspicuous. By far, most people tend to hide themselves in the group, and people say this is the Japanese style. But in the old days, it wasn't like that. In the samurai era, people would use their own sword and represento suru, as written in katakana. It seems to me that that was similar to today's hip-hop style. The MOOC, or magazine book, about the series describes the concept of represent in terms of characters, people who have a strong sense of themselves and who can't be confused with anyone else. Of the two samurai, Jin is the honorable, straight-ahead swordsman, but he is running from a murky past with his old master in school. Mugen is a wild and rambunctious swordsman from the Ryukyu Islands, present-day Okinawa. Fu is a 15-year-old girl with a strength of character to keep the trio on their quest. Each character is meant to stand out as a particular kind of personality. Something like Samurai Champloo represents a theme addressed time and again throughout Ian Condry's book. That is, the pure creative force and energy that surrounds much of this industry. In addition to that, the passage I just read for you shows the fascinating cultural exchanges, like with hip-hop music, something that started in America and ends up in Japan, that have become so much more common in the increasingly globalized world. In the end, Ian Condry presents a fascinating portrait not only of one of the fastest growing entertainment industries in the world, but of the often overlooked interactions between fans and creators. When the fans contribute their own creativity and passion to the completed products of animators and artists, these fans take part in what Condry calls collaborative creativity. This mutual creation that is invested in the animated worlds, stories, and characters of anime are what comprise the soul of anime that is referred to in the title of the book. It is because of the overwhelming strength and energy of this soul that the industry behind these works continues to grow in worldwide popularity with every passing year. The Soul of Anime is one of those research-focused books that manages to avoid sounding like a textbook. It's because of this easier readability, as well as the focus of the book being something many people only know about in name and vague concept, that I would recommend this book to just about anyone interested not only in this industry and Japan itself, but to people looking for an enjoyable nonfiction read about a topic they may not know a whole lot about. In short, I thought this was an incredibly well done book, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to read it. And with that, so ends my review of this book. Thank you so very much for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a wonderful day.